Crisis averted. The dock workers have come to a temporary agreement to keep the shipments incoming to the U.S. No black swan here, folks. Nothing to see. Let's move along. Hey, everybody, you're watching Bull Boom Bear Bust, back with another dose. Let's go ahead and get right into it. What did I say a couple reports ago? I said I would be shocked. I would be surprised if the ones in power right now, the quote-unquote leaders, if they allowed this to happen. Now, it wasn't actually something that came down from the Oval Office level, but the union representing about 45,000 striking U.S. dock workers on the East Coast reached an agreement Thursday, suspend a 3-day strike until January 15th. So an agreement until January 15th, that gets us a few months, and it gets us just after or just prior to a new leader, quote unquote leader, taking office, right? Now we'll talk about what's going to happen likely on both sides a little bit later in this video. Tariffs, that could be a big thing that's going to really ramp up inflation. So the crisis has been averted for now. And what have I said here on this channel? I said they can always find new ways to kick the can down the road. Banks fail, doesn't matter. We're just going to pass a law. We can fund all the banks. Massive consumers can't pay their bills. That's okay. We're just going to make it a law where you can't get repossessed. You can't get foreclosed. You can't get kicked out of your apartment. Right? All these different things can just be changed at the stroke of a pen. So you have to ask, when we say there's not money for certain domestic expenditures, why can't we find the money for those things like relief efforts, right? Huge problems with the relief with the recent storm disasters and the devastation and the rescue operations that are very sad to really see. So you might want to ask yourself, why are some things, some expenditures always funded no matter what? No question on if the money's there. We could just create the money, right? Endless. But other expenditures, oh, we don't have enough. We need to raise your taxes. We need to have you pay more. It's just not there, right? Isn't that funny how that works, folks? If you can't see behind this facade, you need to wake up, folks, because this is happening right before our eyes. But so many people, I'd say 99.9% of the population still have no clue how this whole thing runs, that we went off the gold standard, that we have endless amounts of money to be spent on whatever they want, but not whatever you and I want, right? I'm sure if we could actually choose where the money goes, this world would look a lot different. I'm talking about we, you and I, the people on this channel, but other people out there, the ones in control actually have different opinions on where this money needs to go. Anyway, back to the dock strike here. Plenty of other black swans, though, to be concerned about in October. This is only October 4th. This is just one of the situations I see coming up. I actually see massive social unrest. I would still recommend stocking up on canned goods. I've been saying that even before this whole dock worker strike even became a news story. I've been saying that for a while because I see things continuing to deteriorate, continuing to get worse. I see the financial struggles of most of the population, who, by the way, most living paycheck to paycheck. I see those difficulties becoming more difficult, not less difficult, right? We're seeing more inflation versus any sort of price relief or price corrections or price levels coming down. So what they're telling us with slowdown in inflation just means prices are going up just more slowly. Most of you know this, right? But let's get back to this here. A person briefed on the agreement, this is the dock worker strike agreement now, sweetened their wage offer about 50% over 6 years to a 62% pay raise. The person putting this out didn't want to be identified. The wage increase would have to have been approved by union members as part of a ratification of final contract. The walkout raised the risk of shortages on goods on store shelves if it lasted more than a few weeks. Remember last report, we talked about that union boss who basically was threatening, hey, if they didn't come to the negotiation table, that there's going to be shortages leading to massive job losses, all that, right? We talked about, we played that interview right here. And what did I say? I said, I'd be shocked if some negotiation didn't happen, if some agreement didn't happen. I said, be prepared in case it doesn't happen. But I said, I would be shocked, especially a month out before November, early November, this election. I would be shocked if they didn't come to an agreement, because who would want this all to fall apart, right? If you're a leader, if you're in control right now, the one in power, you want all this to fall apart right before November? Of course not, right? And not that he had anything to do with it, he or she, depending on who you think is the one running the country. Really not running the country, just pretty much going along with what the bankers want. Remember, this is all run by the banks. It's all ran by the money creation, aka the banks, right? Not just the central bank, but the local banks, your local bank, your credit union. They're all loaning out money that they don't have with the zero reserve requirement. Now, we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. New banking rules taking effect this month. Will they stay in effect? Or will something happen where the banks are going to get in trouble and they're just going to say, oh, by the way, we're going to reverse that. Just like all the student loans, we're going to be repaid. We're going to resume the loans. Then they delayed it. Then they resumed it. Then they have a new on-ramping program, right? You see what's going on here, folks? It's always another method of kicking the can down the road. But each time they do that, they avoid a price correction and they avoid the R word, because nobody wants to hear the R word either, especially this time of the year. But each time they do that, inflation gets worse. The cost of living gets higher. You have to have more and more debt for people just to be able to get by. And for people to go into further and further debt, you have to have the banks able to continue to loan out money, even though we're way beyond where we were at the peak of the 2008 financial crisis, where people were over leveraged. It's way worse now. But what's the difference now? The difference now is people can continue to go further into debt. Back then, 2008 financial crisis, the banks halted the lending. It was impossible, not impossible, very difficult to get a mortgage back then. Credit lines were being dropped and credit cards, credit limits dropping. Massive job losses resulted from that. So was it the job losses that caused the banks to stop lending and drop the credit lines on the credit cards? Or was it the dropping of the credit lines and the lending and the easy money mortgages that caused the job losses, right? It's a little bit of both, right? Because you have the fear and the panic causes more economic hardships and pullback on spending and lending. And then that just snowballs into more pain, because the less people spend, the more job losses start to stack up, right? So it's a domino effect, and they're going to try everything they can do to keep this from happening. But I see some things happening also this month. Even with this dock worker thing, still a lot of risks on the table. We're going to talk about that here next. Effective just a few days ago, October 1st, the Fed announced individual capital requirements for all large banks. What does this mean? Well, U.S. banks with more than $100 billion in assets, considered the large banks, the minimum capital requirement for each bank is 4.5%. That may seem like a small number, a small amount, which it actually is. But when you compare it to what's been going on since the health crisis era, 2020, it's a huge number, because it was zero for all those years. Remember all the years of rock bottom interest rates? Well, all the years of zero bank reserves had banks loaning out money hand over fist. And could that have resulted in higher inflation? Absolutely. The more people can borrow money, the more banks can loan out, the higher prices are going to go, because you have millions of more buyers than you would have had if the banks would not have been able to loan out that money or increase these credit card limits. So will we see a massive decrease in available credit in the month of October? And will it have a noticeable impact? I mean, you let me know down below. I don't think so. I think the banks, even if they run into trouble, I think all these new requirements, these capital requirements, are just going to be reversed at the snap of a finger. A crisis may happen for a day or two, kind of like the dock worker strike. 2 days and it was resolved. The banks that failed in 2023, the risk was contained, right? The panic was contained. Always finding new ways to kick the can down the road. But here's my point. My point is that's actually worse. Because we're not going to see a price correction or economic implosion, that means prices are going to continue to go higher. The cost of living continue to go higher. Look at all the other inflationary problems right now. Whoever wins in November is going to have big troubles in their first year in administration, because we never had the correction that we needed to bring price levels down. That means most of the population that's struggling right now is going to be struggling even worse just under a new quote unquote leader. You see what's going on here? So looks to me like they moved this whole dock worker renegotiation to January so they can put it on whoever wins here, right? And then whoever wins, is there going to be any solutions, or is it going to be more of the same, just different methods? again, the tariffs. The tariffs are going to cause inflation. If you know who wins, the red hat guy, it's going to be more tariffs, right? And sure, there's people picking sides because of this, because of that. When you look at the bottom line, the financial situation, it's just going to be more and more keeping the bubbles propped up, keeping the bubbles inflated, not letting any deflation happen, calls for lower interest rates, more of the same. Unfortunately, could I be wrong? I hope so. Now, let's talk about what I think is going to be a very chaotic situation this month here in October or early to mid November. I think it's going to be social unrest, talking about the political situation here. We have both sides that are not going to be able or willing to admit defeat. Both sides, I think. And I think it's going to cause a lot of separation and maybe even chaos and unrest in the streets. And I'm talking riots, I'm talking unrest, I'm talking all this. That's the way I see things playing out. So I think you should be ready and cautious for the effects of this. Shutdowns, possibly, maybe even a big police type of action in many cities, maybe dozens of cities across the U.S. Financial slowdown because of that, shortages, shipping gets disrupted. I think there's still a lot of other risks out there, folks, on top of everything else we've been talking about here. We'll see what happens with the banks. Where are you at? What do you think about all this? Are you still heavily invested in the markets, or do you see a lot of risk like I see? And are you pulling back and kind of waiting and taking a wait on the sideline approach like I am, right? Please let me know down in comments. As always, keep stacking, but stacking smartly, especially now, folks, right? I'm going to wrap this one up, everybody. Keep stacking. Bye for now. Big love. Peace.